All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I'm Tabitha Robinson, and I'm the co-VP of membership for WPCTN. Today, we are here for human trafficking laws in Tennessee. And before we get started, I just want to remind everybody of some upcoming events we have going on. So on Tuesday, April 20th at 6 p.m., we're having a virtual book review and cocktail hour with author Julia Johnson, and she will be discussing her book, Better Luck Next Time. We would love to have you join us. And just as a reminder, reading the book is not necessary. We're here to have a fun discussion. So come, whether you've read the book or not, we would love to have you. Another big event we have coming up is a lunch and learn on leading and advocating, a discussion of the civil rights leader C.T. Vivian. And that's going to be on Friday, April 23rd at noon. And that will be moderated by Larry Woods. And we will have panelists Denise Vivian Morse and Al Vivian, C.T. Vivian's children, and Steve Pfiffer, who is the co-author of It's in the Action. And we'd love to have you for that as well. You can find more information on this at WPCTN.com. And if you've been attending these events and you're not a member, we would love to have you join. And more information is also on our website about that. Now, before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to stay muted. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Alice Chapman, and she will be moderating this panel today. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you, Tabitha, and thank you to the Women's Political Collaborative of Tennessee for inviting us to be here today. Many thanks to all of you on today's call today for joining us to learn more about human trafficking in Tennessee. I'm Alice Chapman. I will be moderating today's panel. I'm the managing partner at MP&F Strategic Communications and the board president of the newly formed Human Trafficking Survivors Court Foundation. So new, in fact, that we are still building out a website and social pages, but the foundation exists to support the participants of Metro's Cherished Hearts Court for human trafficking victims, paying for therapy, transportation, and anything else these women need to rebuild their lives with dignity. We have with us today an esteemed panel of experts, and it's my pleasure to introduce them to you. Sheila Simpkins is the Director of Residential Services at Thistle Farms. In 2007, Sheila celebrated her own graduation from the Thistle Farms residential program and has since devoted herself to prevention, intervention, and mentoring of juvenile and adult victims of human trafficking. She just completed her master's degree in social work from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, so congratulations, Sheila. Margie Quinn is the CEO at the Human Trafficking Direct Service nonprofit in Slavery, Tennessee. She holds a master's degree in public service management and has over 25 years of law enforcement experience. For the last 10 years, Margie has concentrated on innovative human trafficking policies in Tennessee and throughout the United States. She's testified or consulted on over 50 pieces of legislation to the Tennessee General Assembly and the U.S. Congress, and she's considered a national subject matter expert on domestic minor sex trafficking, missing and abducted children, and child abduction response teams. She did spend more than 20 years with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Judge Anna Escobar is the General Sessions Judge for Division III in Metro Davidson County and presides over the Human Trafficking Court. Judge Escobar was elected in August 2018. And prior to her election, Judge Escobar practiced law since 1995, serving as an assistant public defender, an assistant district attorney, solo practitioner, Metro clerk, and deputy administrator of the Administrative Office of the Courts. So welcome to each of you, and thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to start by just introducing the concept of human trafficking. What is human trafficking? According to the United Nations, human trafficking is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by improper means, such as force, abduction, fraud, or coercion, for an improper purpose, including forced labor or sexual exploitation. It takes on many forms, and it touches women and children from all walks of life. We are going to talk specifically about the situation in Tennessee today. I just want to start with some quick stats for you to know. 85% of Tennessee counties report incidents of trafficking in 2021. 72% of Tennessee counties report juvenile trafficking in 2021. Last year, the TBI Human Trafficking Tip Hotline received a record number of calls. Over 900 different calls and tips were received. even during COVID-19. 14,000 to 18,000 individuals are trafficked across U.S. borders annually. And in Tennessee, an average of 94 children are trafficked online each month for sex. Human trafficking is second to drug trafficking as the most profitable criminal industry worldwide. The human trafficking industry brings in between $32 to $50 billion each year. So we're going to go through this discussion today, just asking some questions of our panelists, and I hope we'll have time for questions at the end. But if you have a thought that comes up, feel free to put it in the chat and we will address it. So let's start with Margie. Margie, can you explain the difference between prostitution and human sex trafficking?
Sure, and thank you, Allison. It's an honor to be here with you today. And I have known and worked with my co-panelists here for well over a decade, and I'm excited for us to talk about trafficking today. Prostitution and trafficking, I think we now know, are almost one and the same. They are defined differently in the legal code. Prostitution is obviously a commercial sex act, absent force, fraud, or coercion. It is seemingly willing for the participants, but we know based on all the research and the work that we've done, I think statewide as well as nationally, that most often prostitution is not willing. There is an element of fraud and coercion. And so what we've been training, I think, our law enforcement and our first responders is that you got to take the time and ask the right questions to determine whether or not you're talking to someone who is engaged in prostitution or someone who is actually being trafficked. Understanding also that many trafficking victims do not and will not self-identify.
And obviously, we just discussed that human trafficking is happening in Tennessee. Can you talk a little bit about that in more depth?
Yeah, and I want to talk about where some of that data came from. In 2010, the General Assembly passed a public chapter, Chapter 1023, if anybody wants to look it up, and it required the TBI to produce a research report, both quantifying and qualifying trafficking in the state. And so we partnered with Vanderbilt Center for Community Studies. I was the assistant special agent in charge at that time at the TBI, and we put together a research team and produced results that I think were very shocking for the state of Tennessee. And back then, 85% of Tennessee's counties were reporting adult human trafficking, and about 72% were reporting juvenile trafficking, trafficking of our children. And so I would argue to you that it's probably happening in 100% of our counties. Certainly domestic violence, drug use, those sorts of things. Sexual assault happens in 100% of our counties. And we know crimes involving sexual assault and intimate partner violence are historically underreported. So I could probably make a pretty good argument to you today that this activity is actually occurring across our state in all 95 counties.
What are some common ways that traffickers find people to traffic?
Well, I think there's been quite the evolution in that. And I would say the number one recruiting tool for traffickers at this point is the internet. Our children are all over the internet. I'm speaking as the mother of a 14, going to be 15-year-old daughter. Keeping her off the garbage on the internet is extraordinarily challenging. It's challenging for any parent, especially if you're a parent, say, in your 50s and didn't grow up with this kind of access to information. I think that it's really important to talk about the vulnerabilities which lead children to be trafficked. We're talking about extreme poverty, prior sexual abuse, mental health, drug use in the teen, exposure to long-term violence in the home. We know that according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, if you are being cared for in a state system, in other words, you're in foster care or your custody is being transferred around, that makes you extraordinarily vulnerable. And according to NCMEC, about 1 in 7 of those children are going to be trafficked. Those are the current statistics. And so I think we know what our vulnerabilities are. It's a matter of whether or not we've got the bandwidth within our communities to solve some of those vulnerabilities and fill some of the gaps for children in our immediate communities.
Sheila, I'd love for you to weigh in too on this topic of how traffickers develop relationships with victims and what kind of people they're looking for. Margie's touched on that a little bit, but can you add to that?
Well, yeah, I think it looks different for different people, depending on what type of trafficking it is. I mean, because you have the familial trafficking where it's common for the mother to traffic their child to support their drug habit, or they start conditioning their children at a very young age to use their body to please men. And that's my particular story, but that is a common theme that we've learned about throughout these years. It can look different, like with one of our young ladies that we're actually helping right now. She was looking for a job and got on an airplane and went to another state for an interview and got into the hotel room and found out that it was not a job interview. For youth that run away, they're normally boyfriended in a sense where they're made to feel special. At first, they feel like they're being taken care of, they're fed, they're clothed, they get their nails done, and they're wooed. The guys woo them. And then the next thing you know, they use that component of it to control them. And at that time, most of the juveniles that me and Margie have both worked with in the last 10 years that we've worked together, they don't see themselves as victims. They see themselves as willing participants. And so I don't think that there's a picture that can define exactly what it looks like, because it's different and it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discriminate from, it can be in Green Hills, it can be in Belmead, it can be in Nashville. It can be in Johnson City, one of the small little towns. Yeah.
So you talked about the, girl going for the job interview as an example, the young woman going for a job interview. Are there signs of trafficking that the folks on this call can look for and use to identify victims?
Well, I mean, I think there's always signs. There's like physical injury, abuse. A lot of victims will not be able to be allowed to carry their own identification. There's no eye contact, lack of personal possessions, malnourishment can possibly be a sign of trafficking because of the drug addiction component of it. Drugs are used to kind of control that component. And this is kind of, it sounds a little, it's not as simple as it sounds, but a lot of survivors have a script that they follow if they're pulled over or if they're asked questions that are very specific answers that kind of takes the focus off of themselves. So they have these scripts that they use when they're dealing, especially with law enforcement.
Judge Escobar, let me turn to you for a minute. What type of people are traffickers?
So I would echo a lot of what Sheila has told y'all about how traffickers develop these relationships with the victims. I normally preside over domestic violence court 8 months out of the year, and then I also preside over the human trafficking survivors court once a week. And what has been just so interesting and fascinating to me is that there's so much domestic violence, those dynamics. And so the question, what types of people are traffickers? I think you start with these domestic violence, power and control wheel, it doesn't even have to be intimate partners. There can be family members. Unfortunately, we've had participants whose mothers have trafficked their daughters. And then, there's actually a whole cycle that human traffickers follow, much like the domestic violence wheel that all of us know about, honeymoon period and jealousy and a violent outbreak. But those traffickers are manipulative. I can't say the word. They manipulate. How's that? And there's a lot of domestic violence tendencies. A lot of these women think that their trafficker is their boyfriend or their husband, and they realize that the husband or boyfriend also have other relationships with other women, but they are in love with that person. So that really complicates the ability for this person to leave, much like in a domestic violence situation. Then you have traffickers that are gang members, or, as Sheila mentioned, you think you're going in for a modeling job or some kind of job, and it turns out to be you're tricked into having to trade sex for something. Also illicit massage parlors, caregivers. So traffickers aren't the guy that drives down the street in a white creepy van that just snatches a person. Unfortunately, they can present as normal people, Romeos, people that you fall in love with. And that's what's so difficult about getting these survivors out of these situations.
Marjorie or Sheila, anything else to add to that before we move on to our next topic? All right. No, go ahead.
Not really. I just want to kind of reiterate, that what Judge Escobar said about, the women being in love a lot of the time, you know what I mean? And it kind of takes you back to, they don't see themselves as a victim. It does have a lot to do with that Stockholm syndrome component of it, and that they're conditioned to accept that. And so I'm just really glad that in 2021, we're at a place where we're having a bigger conversation about trafficking. And we're starting to use a victim-centered approach versus thinking that the women, the girls and the boys are choosing that for themselves.
Well, let's talk about the business of trafficking. Margie, I want to turn to you. How is the human trafficking business typically organized? What is some of the language used in that business?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about it, touched on it. The familial trafficking is very common, and I think when you're talking about impoverished communities, I always use Lake County, which is in the northwest tip of the state, as kind of the shining example, if you will. Lake County has 7,800 residents, and they reported 16 to 25 cases of minor human sex trafficking. And so if it is happening to that extent in a county like Lake County, you can imagine what's happening in some of our opportunity zones, for instance, in our more impoverished areas, both in inner cities as well as in rural communities. I think the most shocking thing is that it really is happening per capita of the population as frequently in rural counties as it is in urban counties. And there are far fewer resources available for victims of trafficking in our rural counties. Beyond familial, and like Sheila said, many start there, but that's not where they end up. There's that sort of traditional, what we think of as sort of pimp trafficking. I think we used to think of that as pimping and just the commercial sex industry. I think we now know that is more often than not actually trafficking. And so you might see a central person in control. That can be a man, it can be a woman. We have prosecuted women as traffickers in this state, put them in the federal penitentiary and our state penitentiaries. some of those early on in young childhood were also victims of trafficking, but there is an evolution there for some of the women. And so that sort of traditional singular person in charge with what we call a stable, if you will. And they may control one person, they may control 2 or 3 or 4 people. And we have actually seen one of the first cases that my unit at TBI worked involved 4 or 5 pimps, and they were operating in the sort of what I call central middle Tennessee. Kind of their hub was that Columbia, Murray County area. We identified 32 women associated with these pimps, and they would trade these women and move them around, not just the state of Tennessee, but throughout the Southeast. They were convicted in federal court of trafficking. Because there were a couple of juveniles in those stables who were being traded around. And so that's what I would call more traditional looking trafficking. And then there's organized crime. I think the judge mentioned gangs. We do see gangs increasing their ability to traffic persons, juveniles and adults. It is such a low risk, high reward crime in our state. And by that, I mean, unlike a kilo of cocaine or a drug or a gun, a girl or a woman is typically it's not illegal to possess them. And so if you're caught with a kilo of cocaine, you're going to be charged with possession, most likely possession with intent, right? But a girl or a woman, an 18-year-old, it's not illegal to possess them. And so we see that as a lower risk, high reward crime. It's also a reusable, resellable product, unlike drugs or a gun, and it is extraordinarily lucrative. Before I retired in 2018, I ran 12 major undercover sting operations across the state in both urban areas and rural areas. We put up an ad on the internet advertising someone, and we'd get 3, 4, 5, 6, 800 unique phone numbers to call the 2 or 3 ads that we had up. At that time, it was Backpage. Now there are different websites where people are being advertised. And I would also just kind of insert here that boys and men are also being trafficked. We don't really know what the percentage is. The State Department, the FBI are saying 80% of trafficking victims are female or identify as female. That other 20% are male. But we also know that LGBTQIA plus individuals are disproportionately trafficked. And we know that persons of color are disproportionately trafficked. And so anything that, again, creates that vulnerability can be exploited by familial, traditional pimping or organized crime. Gangs, I would put in organized crime. I would also suggest to you that there is transnational organized crime of trafficking going on. I can't say anything more than that really, but there is transnational organized crime occurring in the state of Tennessee that is under investigation. And so I think it can look very different. I think the Asian spas, for instance, which a lot have been in the news, I think 7, 8, 9 years ago, we shut down almost all of them in the state of Tennessee. TBI has been on those for years. They are absolutely organized crime, and they are involved in both trafficking and prostitution, labor and sex. And so I think people think no harm, no foul, and they're not harming anybody, but these are extremely lucrative and very harmful to exist in our communities.
Well, that's a good segue into the laws that exist in our state. Margie, can you talk a little bit about what laws exist to combat human trafficking and what's pending before the General Assembly right now?
Thank you. We've done so much and frankly so well in the state of Tennessee. When we released those original study results to the General Assembly, in that initial report, Tennessee Human Sex Trafficking and its Impact on Children and Youth, which you can still find those. There are 2 reports out there, research reports that we partner with Vanderbilt on. They're both on the TBI's Human Trafficking Outreach website, and that's www.ithastostop.com. I see Kathy Blakely on the call. Maybe she'll put it in the chat for us. She's the Victim Services Coordinator for TBI. The first two things we did when we released those results to the legislature was create the Human Trafficking Hotline, which I think we'd love to advertise that, the hotline, and there's now a text, Be Free. And so we created the hotline in 2011, and then we decriminalized prostitution for minors. Those are the first two things we did. We did not make prostitution legal for minors. There's a difference. What we said is we're no longer going to arrest 13-year-olds in our state for prostitution. The code was in conflict. Part of the code said these kids were criminals. Part of the code said these kids were victims. And so we clarified that with legislation in 2011. Since then, we've passed, again, about 50 pieces of legislation. Sometimes we'll take a code, for instance, take the statute, the sex trafficking statute 3913-309, and we continue to add to it. In 2013, Alice, you read the sort of the laundry list of things, sort of the predicates for trafficking. Obtain, the word obtain, for the purposes of commercial sex or labor is in both the federal statute as well as the state statute. That applies to the John. So that's the piece of the code that says we can arrest a buyer for trafficking. But in order to be crystal clear about that, and by the way, that was affirmed by the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, but in order to be clear, in 2013, we added the word purchasing. So if you purchase for the purpose of, and where we see this most applicable is in the purchasing of juveniles. And that's where the TBI has really concentrated since about 2015 on people out there who are actually looking to and knowingly purchasing juveniles for sex. And so those are the two biggies. And we have continued to kind of modify and improve the laws. A lot of times and this is still new. We've talked a lot about trafficking in the last decade, but it is really still an evolving crime. We're still learning more and more about that, as we work on it. And so some of the laws that we've passed, we thought looked good on paper, and then we got it into practice, or we got it into the court system, and it didn't work the way we thought it would work. And so you continue to make changes and tweaks to the legislation. There are several things that are really good that are moving this session. And I'm happy to forward the Senate bill or House bill numbers if you're interested in looking a little more into the details of these. We're going to expand technology for children's testimony outside the courtroom. We're going to make the training and detection, intervention, prevention, and treatment of human trafficking for the Department of Education now every 3 years. And so in 2019, they passed a piece of legislation that said all teachers, all public school educators have to be trained on detection, intervention, and prevention of human trafficking, the kids. And so now we're going to do that once every 3 years. We are going to dissolve or do away with the statute of limitations for trafficking, which I think is fantastic because so many of these children who are trafficked, at the youngest forensic interview I've witnessed was a 5-year-old. And so, and we have 2 clients right now under the age of 13 in Slavery, Tennessee that we're providing services for. So they may not be in a position to prosecute a trafficker or prosecute the mom at that point, but when they're 25, they might be. And so we're going to do away with the statute of limitations. We're going to make trafficking for commercial sex acts as a predatory offense, which means you're going to serve 100% of your sentence. We're going to create an aggravated human trafficking statute. This is one I've been lobbying for some years, and it expands the A felony designation to all minors. So when Sheila and I first started in this, it was a misdemeanor to traffic a juvenile for sex. Most of the time that was charged out as other things, other crimes, statutory rape, for instance. And so Initially we made everything under 15 an A felony, 15 and over is a B. Now we're going all the way to 18 as an A felony, and everything 18 and above is a B felony. But I think we know that there's tremendous science right now that suggests that the brain is really not formed until 25. So I'd love to continue to see some movement on that. But as of this year, we will be at all minors or Class A felony. There are a couple of really interesting pieces of legislation around criminal responsibility and the defense doctrine. These are going to be really interesting, I think, for our court systems. This creates the opportunity for an affirmative defense for victims of trafficking. So, for instance, we've got a trafficking victim out in prison in Kansas. She was in the car when her trafficker went in and robbed a convenience store. He didn't shoot anybody, but he took a gun in and robbed a convenience store. She was charged with armed robbery. And so she did not have available to her the affirmative defense of trafficking. And so she is now serving a prison sentence in Kansas. And so these two pieces of legislation, I think, are going to be very interesting as we interpret those through the court system. And there are several others, but those are the biggies that I'm pretty excited about.
Thank you, Margie. Well, let's turn our attention to Nashville. Judge Escobar, what is the Nashville criminal justice system doing to address human trafficking?
Well, I am proud to say that Tennessee, because of all the work that Margie and so many other people have done to respond to this program, we rank #1 in response to human trafficking by the Shared Hope International Survey. So we should be proud as Nashvillians or Tennesseans. But part of how we collaborate and how we respond to the prosecution of human trafficking shows how we take this seriously here in Middle Tennessee. We have an entire dedicated unit at the Metro Nashville Police Department and a dedicated prosecutor who handle exclusively these types of cases. And the wonderful thing is Chief Drake now has actually expanded that unit. So we're so excited to see what happens once they get up and running. So the DA's office will pursue any case with a minor victim who is being solicited for sex as human trafficking, which, as you know, is a B felony. And there's such collaboration, like I said, between law enforcement and nonprofit entities. I know that law enforcement works closely with Slavery and Magdalene to provide that support as these victims, survivors are now becoming witnesses and support them through the process of prosecuting their trafficker. There is another program in Metro called Grace Empowered, and that is a program for women and men who have been charged with prostitution. So instead of getting a jail sentence for prostitution, they have the ability to go to this program, Grace Empowered, and get their charges dismissed and expunged. And the whole point of that is to expose this population to all the resources that we have available to them. So they come in for the day, and the sexual assault centers there, the Office of Family Safety, Metro Public Health, and Slavery, Thistle Farms, and a lot of other community leaders come and they speak to the class and they educate the participants about the risk of engaging in prostitution and what's out there that's available for them if they want to get out of the lifestyle. And they encourage safety planning and finding safe housing. So the point of that is to plant the seed for these participants so that they know there are resources out there when they are ready to get out. Because, you know, the theory at least in Nashville, is people don't engage in prostitution because they love it, right? It's a necessary choice sometimes when there are bad situations. So once again, the point is to show them that the criminal justice system is not wanting to punish them for the trauma they're experiencing, but helping them get back on track, planting seeds for them to know that there are things out in Nashville that can help them in a journey. And finally, we have the Human Trafficking Survivors Court, which is Cherished Hearts and the foundation that support it. And I think later in the presentation, we'll go more into detail about what Cherished Heart does.
Well, that's actually a great segue into all the resources available to survivors and victims of human trafficking. And I'd love our panelists to weigh in a bit more on this. And Sheila, let's start with you. What is Magdalene and Thistle Farms doing to help?
Well, Magdalene's been around for 25 years doing this work. We are a 2-year cost-free program for women with a history of prostitution, trafficking, along with addiction. We have a safe house. We have our social enterprise, which is a phenomenal place for community to come and buy really wonderful products, but also be able to sit down and eat a meal. But we provide services so that the women can heal, restore, and be employed. And we do that through healthcare and counseling, trauma therapy, family reunification, legal advocacy, employment, and our social enterprise. We teach them soft and technical skills so that they can take that and find employment in the community. And then we partner with End Slavery with we just recently in October opened up a safe house because you'll find that most programs in Tennessee, the women have to come with a clean drug screen. And when a woman needs help, and she needs help right then and there, you can't tell them, well, honey, I need you to get clean and stay clean for 3 or 4 days so that you can pass a drug screen and then we can help you. And so through this partnership with End Slavery Tennessee, we opened up a safe house in October where women can come directly from the street, where they have a place to rest for 30 days. And then they have options, whether it be short-term or long-term housing. In Slavery Tennessee, along with Thistle Farms, helps them connect to the resources that they need.
Margie, tell us more about In Slavery Tennessee and this partnership and the other activities you're working on.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. In Slavery Tennessee is a direct service nonprofit serving the 41 counties in Middle Tennessee. We are the single point of contact for trafficking. And what that means is when law enforcement or the Department of Children's Services, hospitals have an emergency referral, they call it In Slavery Tennessee. And we were struggling to place, as Sheila said, that person that's coming off the street fairly hot. And if you have a stable living environment, a house, and you put somebody in there that's very unstable, still using or in the process of coming down off of drugs, that can be very triggering for everybody else in the house. And so housing them separately and providing enough safety around that kind of housing was very important, and it was an emergency. And so we're very grateful to be partnering with Thistle on this new initiative. We also provide training, training first responders, training, as we just talked about a few minutes ago, the public school educators in the state. The State Department of Education asked In Slavery Tennessee to develop the training. It is on our website. It's free for anybody, and it's a great sort of 101 on trafficking. That went so well. We probably trained, sorry, you can hear my dogs moving around. We probably have trained 35,000 public school educators across the state in the last year and a half. And now we are engaged in a new project with the Tennessee Department of Corrections, funded by the Office of Criminal Justice Programs. And we are going to be developing training for all of the Department of Corrections employees, as well as probation and parole. And then the second part of that project is super exciting. We're going to be developing a video series for women who are incarcerated. And the purpose of that is to talk to them about what trauma looks like, what complex trauma looks like, what behavioral manifestations occur as a result of trauma. That's a hugely important piece. And then start programming all across the state in our prisons that mirrors what Magdalene has done for 7 or 8 years and done so successfully. And so that type of programming will now be offered in all of the women's prisons across the state. Restore Core in West Tennessee, Grow Free in East Tennessee, and of course, Thistle will continue to operate that program here in Middle Tennessee. And our goal there is to identify women who have suffered complex trauma, who are potentially trafficking victims, start their programming and community inside, and then transition them out into safe housing and program and community when they get on the outside. I believe that this will dramatically reduce the recidivism of those individuals who are continuing to commit crimes and end up in a revolving door. And at the crux of that is the trauma that they suffered potentially as a fairly young child. And then we're also engaged in prevention. So we are offering prevention classes to juveniles, most of whom are referred to us by the Department of Children's Services or the juvenile courts. And we see that becoming a more and more successful program. The prevention in those young kids who are already behaving in ways that are very, very high risk. And so we're talking about runaway, older boyfriend, behaviors on the internet that are inappropriate. If we can identify those kids early and get them into prevention programming, we may head off a trafficking incident, altogether. We operate one safe house here in Middle Tennessee, and we have offices and a care center. The governor came out with his proposed amended budget on Tuesday, which included $3.5 million in an appropriation for End Slavery Tennessee, in order to start on what we consider to be a 5-phase plan to increase housing on a recovery campus, understanding that victims frequently relapse or struggle in transition. And many times that is around housing, safe housing, stable housing. And so if we can start the recovery process and do transitions on a piece of property in a safe and therapeutic environment, we hope that when they eventually move off the property after 2 years, having lived independently on that property for a year, paying some rent to us, which we will hold in a savings account for them so that when they move out, they've got a little nest egg. But these little mini transitions in a safe and therapeutic environment, and as Sheila talked about, a trauma-informed or trauma-responsive environment, we feel like that's also going to reduce the relapse and recidivism for this particular client population. When the judge was talking, and I would love to make clear to folks that many of these women who end up in the criminal justice system don't end up there because they were charged with prostitution. Many of them committing sort of ancillary crimes, thefts and drug possession, simple assaults. But our court system is now trained to recognize, well, this is a woman who's committed theft or shoplifting. She's also been arrested for prostitution in the past. This may be a trafficking victim. And so we're diverting them into the judge's court in order to try to head off, again, additional trafficking or that additional sort of revolving door.
Great, thank you.
And I'm glad about it. We still have some work to do in that area as far as the women that did not get an opportunity to go to have a Grace Empowered or to have a Cherished Hearts. We still have a lot of work to do whenever it comes to helping adult victims get their records expunged.
Yeah, such great work being
out
done
there.
Judge Escobar, would you like to talk a little bit more about Cherished Hearts and the foundation?
Yes, I am so proud and so honored to be presiding judge of Cherished Hearts. And Cherished Hearts is this little baby. It's my baby, right? It was founded 3 years ago under the collaboration of the district attorney's office and the general sessions judges. And we accept, as I think Sheila or somebody mentioned, we accept participants who are in the criminal justice system due to charges that kind of have ancillary issues with trafficking, such as somebody said, theft and burglary and things like that. And interestingly enough, we don't have anyone charged with prostitution in our program. So we are able to kind of screen out, when we see a charge, why did this person commit it? Was there somebody behind the scenes making them do this? So Cherished Hearts is a treatment court, and I don't know if some of you are familiar with the concept of treatment court. So it's a little bit different than a regular court. There are resources available to participants in treatment courts. There's a team. We have a team of about 10 people from different organizations. The team meets in what we call staffing, where we talk about all the participants to see their progress that week, what we can do in our different organizations to support their recovery, and their entry back into a working life. And these participants start attending court after the staffing. At the very beginning, they come once a week, and then finally they are able to go once a month as they progress in the program. So the difference between the treatment court and regular court is if there's a minor violation of the probation, such as a dirty drug screen, or they missed calling somebody, instead of what traditional court does is just lock them up, violate their probation, we call the person in. There is a sanction. That could mean different things, from writing an essay, doing community service work, sometimes 24 hours in jail, but they get to remain back in the program. So it's used more as a learning tool, a reminder of why they're in the program. And if there is an issue that we can address, then we do try to fill in whatever gaps with the resources that we have. The program is 2 years long. And like I said, it starts with inpatient treatment, then the participant moves to outpatient treatment. And our expectation and our hope is that eventually these participants live independently, they have a job, and there's reunification with their children. And that, to me, is the most rewarding part of this. As I said, during this time, they have access to a case manager, a probation officer, the mental health co-op in case they have mental health issues, and they receive therapy once a week through the Sexual Assault Center. So the way we find our participants are from, honestly, mostly defense attorneys and prosecutors, probation officers, and other judges. But for all you defense attorneys out there, if you're talking to your client and they've got a charge in the criminal justice system and things are not adding up, like Sheila said, they have a script and they keep repeating it, or they can't make decisions for themselves, or they've moved around a lot. They don't even know what their address is. Those kind of things are red flags. You may want to consider getting your client screened for Cherished Hearts, and we would love to have them join our program. So in order to do that, you can contact Melanie Taylor. I think she's on this Zoom. She'll love this. Contact Melanie Taylor, and she is our director for the program. She works out of General Sessions Probation Department, and her number is 615-862-5195. Because honestly, I would say if you see something, say something. I mean, we don't normally walk around our lives thinking this person's being trafficked, this person's being trafficked. Usually your gut is right. And so if you see something that's just not sitting right with you, call one of those hotlines, which I think Miss Alice Chapman is about to tell us about. If they investigate it and there was nothing there, that's fine. Nobody will ever know that you did that. But think about, what if that is a person who has been numbed, beat down, and cannot speak for themselves, and you have helped them in just following your gut. So I hope that you will take advantage of Cherished Hearts when you have one of these clients. We're happy to screen them. We'd love for them to be in the program. And then we also, Alice, would you agree, we would love any support for the foundation. The foundation is able to help with the cost of the therapies and all the extra things that we aren't able to provide through the court system. Alice, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the foundation at this point.
Well, as I mentioned on the front of the call, the foundation is very new, started during the pandemic. And we are attempting to get our website and social presence up, but I'll put my email address in the chat. And if you'd like to be on our list, you can email me and I'll make sure you get the information. But you know, this has just been so informative, such great information. And I wanted to just throw it open in the last 9 minutes we have and see if anybody on the call has any questions for our panelists.
I would point out that Melanie did put her name and extension in the chat, so you can reach her directly at the number in the chat.
While we're waiting, I want to pick up on something the judge said. Many of the women coming through the Cherished Hearts courts and through the criminal justice system who are being identified as trafficking victims have not been arrested for prostitution. That's not why they're in the criminal justice system. And part of that is because, according to the Tennessee incident-based reporting system, which is the way that the state collects all crime and incident data, prostitution arrests statewide are down 65% since 2014. Which is a really good thing. People are coming to understand, first responders are coming to understand that these women are many not in this by choice. And so, and it's not a winning strategy to continue to arrest the same person 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 times. And so we've also begun to put more emphasis on the buyer and the promoter or the trafficker. And so many of the women coming through the court system are not being arrested for prostitution. And it's very important that we are asking the right questions. As the judge stated, kind of if things aren't adding up, if the victim has a very flat affect, which is that script Sheila was talking about, you know, keep asking questions or give one of these service providers a call and seek assistance.
Don't have any questions yet. Sheila, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, not really. I'm just really happy that we're having this bigger conversation, and I'm grateful that In Slavery and Cherished Hearts and Thistle Farms are doing the work that we're doing. It's needed. I just want everyone on here to know that if women choose this for themselves, then you have to ask yourself, what other choice did they have? And continuing to use a victim-centered approach.
I did put the TBI hotline into the chat too. Of course, there's all sorts of resources available at the In Slavery website and the Thistle Farms website. So please feel free to reach out to our panelists as resources as you think more about this work. It is very important and such a timely topic. I know there have been several news stories this week. I think it's getting a lot of elevated attention in our community, which is fantastic. And I'm just so glad that our panelists took the time today to share all of this information with us. Thank you all so much. It's just very informative. And thanks to everybody who took the time out today to be on this call. Really appreciate your interest in being a part of this. Panelists, any other final thoughts? I think we're down to our final minutes here. Margie says, In Slavery has a podcast called Someone Like Me to hear some survivors speak.
And you're not going to hear nitty gritty details of a survivor story there. What you're going to talk about, or hear at least, is some portion of that survivor's very non-linear recovery and restoration process. They may touch on something, you know, a little tidbit or something around their story, but this is really about animating the survivor voices that they can talk about what it means to go from the life and into a recovery and restoration process.
And I think it's also important for everyone to remember that this can happen to anybody. You know, it can be your neighbor, it can be your daughter, it can be your son. This is not just limited to a certain aspect of the population. It's universal, and we all need to be watching for it and help when we can.
You're absolutely right, Alice. And so many of us have children who are in that 14 to 15 range. And, I don't understand all the social media things out there, Discord, Snapchat, all that, but these predators sure do. And they can sense, it seems like, children who have low self-esteem. Y'all know you can love your kids so much, but just because your mom says you're wonderful, sometimes they don't believe it, right? And so these predators just kind of just work their way into your child. And the next thing you know, things, have come to a critical stage. I don't know, Margie and Sheila, you may have more personal knowledge of these kind of situations, but I want to emphasize that is the reality that Nashville, Middle Tennessee is living with, really. So most people think of human trafficking happening in Thailand or somewhere exotic. It's happening on your child's phone. So I don't know if y'all want to add to that.
Yeah,
Grace has a
there's a great question. Thanks, Alice, about protecting children from potential. I personally have it's called Family Link. I've got it downloaded onto my kid's phone. I control how much time she spends on her, and I got it on her tablet too. So I can see every app she downloads, how long she spends on each app. I can limit her ability to access the internet on her phone. The other day she tried to download an app that would allow her to engage in a peer-to-peer contact with somebody, and peer-to-peer means that law enforcement can't intercept it, and it's an extremely private way to communicate. And I don't want my child on a peer-to-peer connection with somebody that I don't know who they are. And so that's what I do personally. You can also go to NCMEC, again, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and look at the way some of these apps are rated. Look at your children's phone. Look and see what apps they've downloaded. Do a Google search for that app and whether or not it's safe. That's what I do now that I'm outside of law enforcement and I don't have the person across the hall that does this all the time that I can go ask and say, is this one good, or is this? My kid doesn't TikTok, she doesn't Snapchat, she doesn't do any of that on. If your kid's playing Roblox, there are huge warnings out on Roblox because predators are on there looking for kids all the time. Anything that's really geared towards a kid, I'm telling you, a predator is going to get on there and solicit your child or send them an image that you don't like. And so it's impossible to keep it completely off of there, completely out of sight for them. But good communication and really policing up what your kids are doing on the internet would be my advice.
There's a question, Margie. It says, I was curious about how many victims are from local community and how many come in from other states because of our highways. She was wondering how many are brought from out of state. And I can say that as far as like Grace Empowered goes, I'm a survivor advocate for that program. And when the women, a lot of the women that come and participate in Grace Empowered are from out of the Nashville area. Nashville is a pretty big city, and with the conference center and everything that goes on downtown, it being Music City, a lot of women are brought to the Nashville area for the purpose of making money. I do know that whenever I came in 1997, I was brought to Nashville because Nashville is known for a lot of money. There's a lot of money being spent on women buying sex in this city alone.
So in 2020, ESTN received 170 referrals for service, and that's during the pandemic. The year before that, we had 307 referrals for service. Those are all women who are either being trafficked into or outside of the state of Tennessee. 3% are non-US citizens. About 20% of our caseload is under the age of 18. The average age is 15 for the child client. And so we are only housing and serving individuals who are either trafficked into, and that could be somebody who's trafficked in here from Louisville. And we may spend, several days or a couple of weeks working with that client and then facilitating their return to a home state or a handoff to a like agency where they want to go. But they've got to have that nexus to Tennessee for us to house them and work with them.
All right. Any other questions for our panel? Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you again to our esteemed panel. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks to everyone for being on today and for all the great questions. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day and a great weekend.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.